What's up, ladies and gentlemen? Christian Hannah Horror here again. Today we're talking about, just an incredible movie. On Christian's Call Classics Day, we're talking about Phantasm. Now, the thing about this review is I'm not really going to be able to make sense about the movie, and I think that's one of the reasons this movie is so absolutely incredible. At the heart of the story, though, it's about two brothers and a friend who discover that this mortician, this guy who's running this graveyard, this guy who's running this cemetery, is basically stealing bodies after these funerals are happening and things are getting really weird, and then there's these spheres running around everywhere. Tall man figures out that these people are onto him and he starts haunting them. It gets absolutely bizarre. But Phantasm has to be one of the greatest horror movies I think I've ever seen. One thing I really love about Phantasm is the sound of the movie. The soundtrack is as iconic, I think, as almost any horror movie soundtrack. You got to put it up there with, Halloween. You got to put it up there with, the Psycho theme. You got to put it up there with, The Fog, or really any John Carpenter soundtrack, to be honest with you. But what I really love about this movie is the mood and atmosphere, because those are two words that absolutely personify what this movie is all about. This is not a typical horror movie. It really isn't, because quite honestly, there really is nothing since or after it that comes close to what this movie is. Phantasm is truly a one-of-a-kind film. Another thing I really do love about this movie is Angus Scrimm himself as the Tall Man. This Tall Man is basically, I think he's the devil. I think he is harvesting for hell. I think that maybe religion has become powerful to where there aren't enough people maybe going to hell and dying and going to hell, and then the Tall Man just is harvesting bodies and stealing bodies, and I think that's how I try to justify it. I don't know. I mean, that's the thing. There's really no complete rhyme or reason, but you kind of have to fill in the blanks yourself with a movie like Phantasm. I think that's what's really cool about the movie. The Tall Man is absolutely horrifying. There's this great scene where Michael is at the graveyard and he's peeking behind a tombstone and he sees the Tall Man just look around and lift up the coffin and throw it in the back of his hearse and drive off. And I remember just seeing that for the first time, like, whoa, because when you first watch this movie, it's like you're just expecting a typical style horror movie. You don't expect all this craziness to start ensuing, and that's really what happens. I don't know what you would... I guess you would call this a pod movie. It's definitely not a slasher horror movie. Trying to categorize it is actually kind of tough, so I really don't know what to call Phantasm. I guess you would call it a pod movie. I just call it Phantasm. I mean, honestly, there's nothing like it. Trying to describe it, like I said, is probably one of the hardest things I'll ever try to do, but I'll keep it short and I'll keep it sweet. Phantasm is one of the greatest 70s horror movies ever made, and while the sequels are good, none of them, I think, really capture the epitome of just horror and just atmosphere that the first one does. And Phantasm is an absolute classic. We can't go without mentioning the legendary spheres in this movie. These spheres that have these spikes that come out, that will just come out of nowhere in the mausoleum and just fly up to you and boom, right in your head and drain all the blood out of you. Just the imagination is 10 out of 10 on this movie. It's absolutely great. And then we see the introduction of Reggie, the ice cream vendor. Just weird, but then again, it was the 70s, so I'm assuming ice cream vendors were much more popular. I mean, they had a couple when I was a kid, but you don't see them anymore, at least where I live. All the quirky things and oddities about Phantasm are kind of what make this movie what it is. A predominantly male cast again, kind of different, especially back in the time, I think, but maybe not, because slasher movies really hadn't taken over the world yet. But looking back now, you just don't see it a whole lot. So seeing two brothers and an ice cream vendor star in this movie is great. The ending of the movie is fantastic because it is a not good ending. It's very bad. The Phantasm Tall Man basically wins. He gets his hands on Michael. We were to think that, the worst is about to happen. So coming up with the sequel to this was probably really tough, but they figured it out. But Phantasm, one of the greatest horror movies ever. I love watching this movie, and if you haven't seen it, what are you doing?